Government gangsters are the group of individuals, career bureaucrats, who have been installed by what we call the deep state into every agency and department in the United States government.
What do you think of the way that the intelligence community handled the so-called Russia dossier? And overall, how do you think of the way they've handled Donald Trump?
I've lived in this world for 45 years where you get things and people make allegations. That is a garbage document.
When the President of the United States, who has taken an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, uses his position to, in effect, extort a foreign government for his own political purposes, I think that is very much what the founders worried about in high crimes and misdemeanors.
Do you agree with Mr. Horowitz that the dossier was central and essential to the Carter Page FISA warrant application being approved?
I agree that it was important. I can't tell you whether it was essential, and by that I mean that it wouldn't have been granted without the Steele information.
We're heading down a path that many other countries have trod before, towards the degradation of our democracy.
Did you find direct evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Putin in Moscow while you were there?
I never was an FBI agent, I never was a prosecutor, so I really don't do evidence, I do intelligence.
Is there anything in the dossier that has been disproven?
No, some of it hasn't been proven. The salacious stuff, absolutely no corroboration of that to my knowledge.
So you have seen direct evidence of collusion?
I don't want to go into specifics, but I will say that there is evidence that is not circumstantial and is very much worthy of investigations.
The biggest terrorist threat here in the U.S., here in the homeland, is what we would call sort of homegrown violent extremists.
As our conversation continued, the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, or DAG, proposed that he could potentially wear a recording device into the Oval Office to collect additional evidence on the president's true intentions.
We do not have one rule for Republicans and another rule for Democrats. We don't have one rule for foes and another for friends. We have only one rule. And that one rule is to follow the facts and the law.
It's hard to imagine two FBI agents ending up in the same room. How did that happen?
I sent them. Something I probably wouldn't have done or maybe gotten away with.
A government gangster is any individual who enters government service and instead of upholding their oath to the Constitution and fulfilling their role of service, they subscribe to a different political ethos and utilize their position in government, along with relationships in the media, to achieve a political objective rather than fulfill the duties of their job. Their primary objective is a self-preservation of the state. They seek to curry favor for themselves and their private interest groups, advancing their own goals rather than upholding the constitutional rights of the American people. These government gangsters have infiltrated not just the agencies and departments of our government, but have also made their way into the halls of Congress, the private sector, the lobbyists on K Street, the defense industrial complex, and even the White House.
It is finally time for a straightforward assessment of the state of our nation.
Donald Trump represented the antithesis to the deep state. For decades, the entrenched figures of the deep state had thrived, but they saw Trump coming with a single relentless goal: to drain the swamp and to end their post-government profiteering. The one man who had the power to dismantle their stronghold was Donald Trump. These people are dangerous and vindictive, learning from their mistakes and perfecting ways to hide their corruption. Each phase of the Get Trump campaign, from Russiagate to Ukraine impeachment to Hunter Biden's laptop to the classified document scandal, the January 6th insurrection narrative, and now these baseless court cases, has taught them to better cover their tracks and deceive the American people. Rest assured, these government gangsters and their proteges are exploring every angle to silence not only Donald Trump, but the millions of Americans who support him. These government gangsters follow a predictable pattern. They pick a target and fabricate accusations. Then they deploy assets across agencies like the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the Department of Justice to gather intelligence supporting their false claims. They leak these false findings to sympathetic mainstream media, which reinforce their original accusations with articles and news stories. Finally, they use federal machinery to bring down their target. This playbook has been used repeatedly from Russiagate to the current bogus court cases. I was in government for 16 years. I was a federal public defender. I was a federal prosecutor, a terrorism prosecutor. I was a civilian at Joint Special Operations Command with SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force. I did that during the Obama administration, during the Bush administration. Throughout U.S. history, our government has made mistakes, whether it's Watergate, Benghazi, or what have you. During my government career, none of that was ever sufficient enough in my mind to start questioning the leadership in government throughout the top levels of every agency and department. And I had never thought that the government could become so corrupted until I encountered firsthand the Benghazi cover-up and the Hillary Clinton email scandal. After 13 years of nonpartisan public service, I knew we had a serious issue with our government, and my role in the conflict would only grow as I learned more. Our story starts during the 2016 presidential election with Democrat candidate Hillary Rodham Clinton, a private email server, and 33,000 emails.
In retrospect, this didn't turn out to be convenient at all. And I regret that this has become such a cause célèbre.
You were the official attorney. Did you like the server?
What, like with a cloth or something?
No. Well, no. How it works digitally.
Hillary Clinton had a long record of government service, from First Lady to New York Senator to Secretary of State under Barack Obama. She also had a career marred by numerous scandals. Hillary Clinton, while running for president, had a private server installed at her home where she stored and exchanged classified information, sending and receiving over 24 classified emails unlawfully. She was never president and didn't have the authority to handle such classified information outside proper channels. Yet she repeatedly denied having any classified emails on that server.
I will reiterate, because it's a fact, nothing I sent or received was marked classified. There is no classified material. That I never sent or received any material marked classified.
Her claims would be proven false by an FBI investigation headed by then FBI Director James Comey. James Comey, the former FBI director, began his career as a U.S. attorney prosecuting criminals in New York. He rose through the government ranks, eventually becoming the Deputy Attorney General at the Department of Justice. He would then be nominated and confirmed as the FBI Director, the top cop in the United States of America for all law enforcement.
He doesn't care about politics. He only cares about getting the job done.
James Comey seemed like the obvious choice to investigate Hillary Clinton's mishandling of classified information.
To communicate classified information would have to be a classified rated email system.
But you did find more than 100 emails that were classified that had gone through that server, correct?
Right, through an unclassified server, correct.
Yes. So Hillary Clinton did come to possess documents and materials containing classified information via email on these unsecured servers, correct?
That is correct.
When James Comey revealed that Hillary Clinton had mishandled classified material, that investigation itself warranted prosecution and indictment based on its own merit. However, this did not occur. Instead, Comey made a unilateral decision, setting a new precedent for the FBI.
Although there is evidence of potential violations of the statutes regarding the handling of classified information, our judgment is that no reasonable prosecutor would bring such a case.
He told the world, without telling the Attorney General, that Hillary Clinton did not commit a crime and that no reasonable prosecutor would ever bring that charge. The FBI, including its director, do not make prosecution decisions. James Comey was not a prosecutor then. He was the director of the FBI. The prosecuting decision is left to the Department of Justice. That's the law. James Comey hijacked that decision from then Attorney General Loretta Lynch, and she allowed him to do so, which revealed collusion between the FBI and the DOJ on behalf of Hillary Clinton. James Comey disrupted the justice system when he intervened on behalf of Hillary Clinton, highlighting what would become known as the two-tier system of justice. He created the false perception that the FBI makes prosecutorial decisions, which they do not. The Hillary Clinton classified email scandal set the stage for future events, unveiling a vast network of government operatives. Their collective force would soon shift to one person, Donald J. Trump. It's historically inconceivable to think that the FBI, the DOJ, and the intelligence community combined forces to spy on a presidential candidate until 2016. Russiagate can be summarized as the following. It was a collusion between the intelligence community, law enforcement, and a presidential campaign to discredit and destroy a candidate running for president of the United States. Russiagate revolved around former MI6 operative Christopher Steele, who contracted for the private intelligence firm Fusion GPS. Christopher Steele, a former MI6 officer with experience in Russia, later transitioned to the private sector and became an FBI source. He authored the Steele dossier, which became the centerpiece of the FBI's application for a surveillance warrant against then citizen and candidate Donald Trump. During the 2016 presidential election, the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC devised a plan to accuse candidate Donald Trump of being a Russian asset. They initially used their law firm, Perkins Coie, to hire Fusion GPS to find damaging information on Donald Trump. Fusion GPS then deployed Christopher Steele, who compiled his now infamous dossier. While opposition research is common in campaigns, this operation was far from typical. Almost no candidates and campaigns ever utilized the full power of the FBI and the intelligence community to get that information through FBI sources to conduct opposition research. Christopher Steele's dossier claiming Donald Trump was a Russian asset found its way to the FBI, prompting an investigation. The problem? None of the Steele dossier claims were true, and it was later discovered that Steele had fabricated his findings. What were some of the main points? Steele alleged that Trump had multiple prostitutes engaged in sexual acts at a fancy hotel in Moscow. He also claimed that Trump's personal attorney was in Eastern Europe acting as a Russian asset on a specific date. Ultimately, all of the findings in the Steele dossier were proven false. Although this led to Steele being fired as an FBI source, the FBI did not sever ties with him so easily. To continue working with their former source, the FBI created a cutout through DOJ top prosecutor Bruce Orr, who acted as an intermediary between Steele and the FBI. Shockingly, Bruce Orr's wife also contracted for Fusion GPS, the very firm that helped fabricate the Steele dossier. Steele was introduced to the DOJ by Fiona Hill, then at the Brookings Institute, who also introduced him to her research assistant, Igor Danchenko, a key source for the Steele dossier. Ironically, Danchenko later revealed that the Steele dossier was filled with falsehoods as he knew its details intimately. This unprecedented collusion between the Hillary campaign, Fusion GPS, and insiders like Bruce Orr at the DOJ laid the foundations for the Russiagate hoax. With the Steele dossier in hand, the FBI now needed to prove Trump was a Russian asset. To do this, they needed a way to gather intelligence on him. This meant finding a way to wiretap his campaign. If they could flip or entrap someone within the Trump team, it would give them the evidence they needed. The Russiagate operation began in England, requiring the help of the CIA. For the FBI to launch an overseas intelligence operation, the law requires they get permission from the CIA's local station chief. Gina Haspel was the CIA station chief in London at this time, one of the agency's most senior overseas positions. Gina Haspel received the FBI's request to deploy informants to target Trump campaign aides, hoping to flip or entrap them into revealing any information about Trump being a Russian asset. Consequently, the FBI sent operatives and agents to the United Kingdom, kickstarting the Russiagate hoax in 2016. That level of engagement by the Central Intelligence Agency is unheard of in U.S. history until now. These investigations would focus on several Trump aides, but one in particular stood out, Carter Page. Carter Page became a target due to claims made in the Steele dossier. An American citizen and former U.S. naval officer, Page later pursued a private sector career, which included involvement with Russian companies. He ultimately served temporarily as an associate or advisor to then-candidate Trump's campaign in 2015 and 2016. Christopher Steele claimed that he had credible evidence that Carter Page traveled to Russia on behalf of the Trump campaign, meeting with two major oil and gas tycoons to arrange a quid pro quo deal. The dossier claimed that the Russians offered Carter Page a brokerage fee for facilitating the sale with 19% stake in Rosneft, a large oil company, in exchange for his assistance in lifting Western sanctions against the company. With Carter Page as their target, they needed corroborating evidence. But how do you support a false operation? By leveraging FBI and DOJ-friendly media. Without the media, there is no Russiagate narrative. The FBI, DOJ, and intel community selectively leaked information to media outlets like Yahoo News and journalist David Korn, instructing them to write articles about Donald Trump being a Russian asset.
David, I want to begin with you. You broke this story about a veteran spy who was hired by a Republican client, who then turned a Democratic client, who was critical of Trump back in the summer to see if they could find any sort of connection between Trump and Russia. You say that this spy reported a, quote, extraordinary situation. Tell us about that.
He comes to conclude that there has been an ongoing, for several years, Russian operation to kind of cultivate or co-opt Donald Trump, and that at times the Russians have given information to the Trump campaign, and in return, they've gotten information from the Trump campaign.
The stories the media ran on behalf of the FBI became initial corroborating evidence for the FISA court case. To strengthen their case, more sources were needed. Enter Victoria Nuland, a career State Department official serving in the Clinton State Department and ultimately serving the senior position in the Obama State Department and the Biden State Department. While working in the Obama State Department, Nuland received the Steele dossier from Christopher Steele. She related to the FBI as a State Department employee, making it appear as if it came from another credible source, even though the FBI knew it originated from the Hillary Clinton campaign.
When he was doing this other work and became concerned,
the dossier,
he passed 2 to 4 pages of short points of what he was finding, and our immediate reaction to that was, this is not in our purview. This needs to go to the FBI. If there is any concern here that one candidate or the election as a whole might be influenced by the Russian Federation, that's something for the FBI to investigate.
All the pieces were in place to approach the FISA court to wiretap the Trump campaign. FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, allowed for surveillance of individuals believed to be foreign agents or acting at the behest of a foreign power. The FISC, or Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, issues these warrants similar to search warrants for bank robbers and drug traffickers, but used for foreign intelligence collection purposes. To get the FISA surveillance warrant, the FBI had to show that the target was either acting as a foreign agent against a U.S. interest or being paid by a foreign actor to do so. Providing this would give probable cause to collect extensive information on the individual and their network. The FBI presented the FISA court with their application, including the Steele dossier, media evidence, Victoria Nuland as a corroborating source, and Carter Page its target. It's important to note that the FBI omitted from their application evidence proving Carter Page was not a Russian asset, which he had already proved to the DOJ and FBI. The FBI went to the FISA court with their brief signed off by James Comey and the Attorney General, and then essentially said Donald Trump is a Russian asset and we need to wiretap the Trump campaign. Based on this web of falsehoods, the FISA court issued the wiretap. Once you go after one target, you're allowed to hop over on cell phone companies to other targets and emails. These operatives used Carter Page to ultimately gather information against Donald Trump. These government gangsters knew they were authoring a corrupt criminal enterprise, but they didn't care about following the law as long as they completed the weaponization of justice to ensure Hillary Clinton would become president. That's Russiagate. You would think, with the full might of the intelligence community plotting to destroy a presidential candidate, they would have succeeded. But the American people overwhelmingly helped stop the deep state and elected Donald Trump. Despite all the false attacks, he won a decisive victory in 2016 to become the 45th president of the United States.
For those who have chosen not to support me in the past, of which there were a few people. I'm reaching out to you for your guidance and your help so that we can work together and unify our great country.
With the Steele dossier failing to destroy its target, all the actors involved now had a problem. They had broken laws and gone to terrible extents to stop Donald Trump. And now he was in office and they were exposed. So they had to move into the next phase. And this is where Barack Obama would come in.
Hillary has real plans to address the concerns she's heard from you.
A lot of people ask whether or not President Obama knew about Russiagate. In my opinion, he did. He was briefed on it by John Brennan. John Brennan was a career intelligence operative that worked in our intelligence community for over 30 years. He would rise through the ranks of the Central Intelligence Agency and ultimately become Barack Obama's director of the CIA. We have the notes from Brennan briefing Obama before he left the White House to prove it. Obama told Brennan to gather all the communications from the Trump campaign picked up from secret communication cables and create a report called the ICA, or the Intelligence Community Assessment. This report would continue the narrative that Trump is a Russian asset, and this came directly from Barack Obama himself.
So this is a resounding statement from the Intelligence Committee in the Senate saying when that report came out from the NSA and the FBI and the CIA in January 2017, as the Obama administration was leaving and the Trump administration was about to be sworn in, that intelligence community assessment that said Russia had meddled in the election to try to throw the election to Trump. Now the Intelligence Committee in the Senate, the bipartisan Intelligence Committee, both Republicans and Democrats are saying, yeah, that intelligence community report, that was sound.
What they wanted to do was in 3 short weeks, produce a document to show the American people what happened in the presidential election, because they believed there was no way that Donald Trump could have won this thing squarely and fairly, which he did.
People here in the White House work hard. But John is legendary even in the White House for working hard. He is one of the hardest working public servants I've ever seen.
After Obama left the White House, John Brennan would use the media to continue the Russian interference accusations.
It's very clear that the Russians interfered in the election, and it's still puzzling as to why Mr. Trump does not acknowledge that and embrace it, and also push back hard against Mr. Putin.
In order for the Russiagate operation to get funding and approval and move forward on so many fronts, you really needed sign-off from 2 people. John Brennan, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, and James Clapper, the director of national intelligence. James Clapper was a military officer in the United States military for decades. He would later go on to serve in military intelligence roles, and ultimately Barack Obama would appoint him to become the Office of the Director of National Intelligence's #1 position. James Clapper, as Director of National Intelligence, oversees the entire intelligence community and its 17 agencies and departments. James Clapper went before the United States Congress under oath and swore that FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, was never used against American citizens within the territorial boundaries of the United States, even though he knowingly had done it hundreds of thousands of times. James Clapper was the one that would go on and leak information to CNN about Russiagate after Donald Trump was victorious so that they could gin up a narrative to take him out before he got to the Oval Office.
But at the same time, some of the substantive content, not all of it, but some of the substantive content of the dossier, we were able to corroborate in our intelligence community assessment, which from other sources, in which we had very high confidence level.
So when the president just refers to it as fake dossier, that is false?
I don't think that is the accurate characterization for the entirety of the dossier.
John Brennan and James Clapper, along with James Comey at the FBI, initiated all of these operations with Obama's knowledge. The Russiagate operation may have failed, but this was just the beginning for these government gangsters.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
After a number of months into the Trump presidency, I was approached by then Chairman Devin Nunes to take on the Russiagate investigation due to my long career in the intelligence community and as a prosecutor. I had never met Donald Trump. I had never spoken to Donald Trump. I had never communicated with Donald Trump, ever. I did the thing that 99% of government officials do. I signed up to serve the mission, and I did it for over 13 years before I had ever even met Donald Trump. I took the job with one condition. I told Devin I'd never met Trump. I don't know him, never called to him, never spoken to him, ever. And I don't know if any of these allegations are true or false. But I said to him, whatever we find out, we put out to the American public. And he agreed. So when we first started, we thought we would find a couple of bad actors, maybe a few dollars in the U.S. government that were being spent for political purposes, and reform the system pretty easily. Nobody thought we would end up writing the Nunes memo and the Russiagate report that exposed every government gangster from multiple agencies to use political funding to hijack a presidential election and rob the American people of the truth. Me, least of all.
I hope today's hearing will shed light on 3 important focus points of the committee's investigation on Russia active measures. First, what actions did Russia undertake against the United States during the 2016 election campaign? And did anyone from political campaign conspire in these activities?
When Russiagate first initially surfaced, Devin and myself never thought we would come into an investigation of this magnitude. Me, as a guy who used the FISA court and FISA applications to manhunt terrorists around the world as a national security prosecutor, never thought the FISA court could be corrupted. I could not be more wrong. We began our investigation and ultimately produced what was called the Nunes memo. The Nunes memo was a compilation of information that came directly from the FBI's own documentation, the DOJ's own memorandums, and our investigation and interrogations of witnesses under oath. We wanted to give the American public a quick summary into the status of our investigation and how explosive it was. We would tie together all the corrupt agencies and government gangsters like the FBI and DOJ, their private sector operators like Fusion GPS, and how they lied to the federal FISA court to unlawfully surveil a presidential candidate. Immediately, we were attacked by the left. The Democrats wrote a responding memo called the Schiff Memo. Before 2016, 99% of America and the world had never heard of Adam Schiff. Then Russiagate happened. Adam Schiff was a former federal prosecutor turned congressman from the state of California for nearly 2+ decades. He also served as the opposition head on the House Intelligence Committee as the ranking member when Chairman Devin Nunes served at its lead.
Last summer, at the height of a bitterly contested and hugely consequential presidential campaign, a foreign adversarial power intervened in an effort to weaken our democracy and to influence the outcome for one candidate and against the other. That foreign adversary was, of course, Russia, and it acted through its intelligence agencies and upon the direct instructions of its autocratic ruler, Vladimir Putin, in order to help Donald J. Trump become the 45th president of the United States.
Adam Schiff would author the disinformation campaign from the House Intelligence Committee, where he would repeatedly go out to the media after we were interrogating witnesses behind closed doors and intentionally lie about what they said.
Was there any request made by the FBI or Justice Department to wiretap Donald Trump turned down by a court?
That's one of those subjects I can't comment on one way or another. Please don't interpret that in any way other than I just can't talk about anything that relates to the FISA process in an open setting.
Adam Schiff had no problem leaking information. He would go to the podium repeatedly and hold up an envelope saying, I have the proof that Donald Trump is a Russian asset in this envelope, but it's classified. We now all know that there was nothing in that envelope because there was no proof because Donald Trump was not a Russian asset. Adam Schiff would emerge as a primary narrator to the Russiagate lies, countering our investigation to find the truth.
The information that was used in part in the FISA application came from a trusted source, Christopher Steele, someone who is a respected member of British intelligence.
We do know that the Russians throughout the campaign were making outreach to the campaign.
This would not be his last time he would act as a mouthpiece for false accusations. He would later become the primary motivator in the coming impeachment. The world of the government gangster is a revolving door. One of the best examples is when President Trump fired Comey. Comey would be caught leaking classified memos documenting meetings with the president to trigger a special counsel.
The president tweeted on Friday, after I got fired, that I better hope there's not tapes. I woke up in the middle of the night on Monday night, because it didn't dawn on me originally, that there might be corroboration for our conversation. There might be a tape. And my judgment was I needed to get that out into the public square. And so I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter. Didn't do it myself for a variety of reasons, but I asked him to because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel. And so I asked a close friend of mine to do it.
And was that Mr. Wittes?
No, no.
Who was that?
A good friend of mine who's a professor at Columbia Law School.
He would be replaced by Christopher Wray.
I've heard many people describe me as understated and low-key. My kids would describe me more as just boring. But
there's some head nodding at 01.
Exactly.
Going.
I don't want to look back, but no one should mistake my low-key demeanor as a lack of resolve, as some kind of willingness to compromise on principle, because anybody who does would be making a very grave mistake.
Chris Wray started out as many government attorneys do in the private sector. He would later go on to become an assistant United States attorney at the Department of Justice and prosecute many violent criminals. He would later then be promoted in the Bush administration to the head of the National Security Division at the Department of Justice. The House Intelligence Committee, where I ran the Russiagate investigation, myself and then Chairman Nunes sat down with Director Wray and then Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, and we said, look, Russiagate didn't happen on your watch, but help us clean it up. And they refused to do that. Rod Rosenstein, as the effective acting Attorney General for the Russiagate investigation after then AG Sessions sidelined himself. So what did he do? He was sent 17 subpoenas by our House Intelligence Committee, demanding information about government sources, about where money came from, about exculpatory evidence, and everything else we could find out about why Donald Trump was surveilled once we figured out, through our sources, that it was unlawful. He and his lackey, Chris Wray, would combine forces to ensure that none of the information that is now known in the Nunes memo and the Russiagate investigation ever surfaced.
Mr. Rosenstein, did you threaten staffers on the House Intelligence Committee? Media reports indicate you did.
Media reports are mistaken.
Christopher Wray and Rod Rosenstein had authorized government surveillance and grand jury subpoenas against 10 senior congressional staffers, including myself, to destroy our investigation, and then lied about monitoring federal employees to Congress. This was the FBI working overtime to protect itself from a legitimate investigation into their egregious misconduct. We discovered 5 years later that Rod Rosenstein had lied about his severe actions. Google revealed that they had been served grand jury subpoenas for bank accounts, personal information, text messages, phone calls, and emails, and more. Rod Rosenstein and Chris Wray continued the corrupt practices initiated by James Comey, further weaponizing the system of justice against government employees, exposing FBI corruption. We pushed forward despite their roadblocks. Robert Mueller was a former director of the FBI who was named special counsel by Rod Rosenstein, then Deputy Attorney General. Robert Mueller's mandate was to go in there and investigate whether or not Donald Trump colluded with Russia. The Mueller report was the mainstream media and the radical left's last gasp effort to try and prosecute Donald Trump. During the Robert Mueller investigation, Democrats in Congress were already planting seeds for their next assault on the president.
Democrats are using this investigation as a presumption of guilt, which I find astonishing. And in the long run, for the health of this republic, I would encourage them to go back to the presumption of innocence that we used to hold sacred. There's a presumption of guilt. There's a desire by Democrat senators to fundraise off of your investigation. More than 60 Democrats have already voted to proceed with impeachment before Bob Mueller has found a single solitary damn thing. More than 60 have voted to move forward with impeachment, and he hasn't presented his first finding.
Robert Mueller's report ultimately concluded that there was insufficient evidence to prove Donald Trump was a Russian asset.
The first volume of the report details numerous efforts emanating from Russia to influence the election. This volume includes a discussion of the Trump campaign's response to this activity, as well as our conclusion that there was insufficient evidence to charge a broader conspiracy.
Whether we decide to impeach the president in the House or we do not, we must take any action necessary to protect the country while he is in office. You would not tell us the results or whether other bodies looked into Russian compromise in the form of money laundering, so we must do so. You would not tell us whether the counterintelligence investigation revealed whether people still serving within the administration pose a risk of compromise and should never have been given a security clearance, so we must find out.
Bill Barr served as an attorney general during the Trump administration. He employed special counsel John Durham to look into Russiagate's corrupt activities that we had exposed.
At more than 300 pages and the product of 480 interviews and the review of 6 million pages, the report criticized the FBI for investigating the 2016 Trump campaign, saying the Bureau and the Justice Department, quote, failed to uphold their important mission of strict fidelity to the law.
On July 31st, in my view, based on our investigation, there was not a legitimate basis to open this a full investigation.
Special counsel John Durham says the FBI used unverified information when it opened the investigation into candidate Trump's alleged ties to Russia in 2016. Durham concludes senior FBI personnel displayed a serious lack of analytical rigor and relied on investigative leads provided or funded by Trump's political opponents. Trump railed repeatedly against the FBI investigation.
Absolutely spying into my campaign.
Ultimately, the Durham report, along with the Mueller report and the Nunes memo, would prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Donald Trump was in no way a Russian asset, nor did any of the campaign or members of the White House collude with Russia in any way. But this would not be the end of the government gangsters' attempt to destroy Donald Trump. Only 2 days after the Mueller investigation had ended, the government gangsters shifted to a new strategy. The accusation would be that Donald Trump was in collusion with Ukraine to take down future opponent Joe Biden.
This impeachment is not really about facts. If it was, I believe the other committees would have sent over recommendations for impeachment. No, they're putting it on this committee because if it goes badly, I guess they want to blame Adam Schiff's committee and his and others want to blame this committee for it going bad. But they're already drafting articles. Don't be fooled. They're already getting ready for this. We've already went after this with the Ukraine after numerous failings of Mueller, Cohen, annulments. The list goes on.
Alexander Vindman was an employee of the United States government, a former military officer in Trump's National Security Council, who ultimately was removed because he participated in launching the false Ukraine impeachment scandal. There would be a call between President Trump and the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. Alexander Vindman was on this call. This would be what kicked off the impeachment hoax. There was a former Biden staffer under the Obama administration named Eric Charmella, who had ended up working in the Trump White House. He had received the transcript of the call between President Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. In 2019, Charmella made a claim that Trump was going to withhold foreign aid from Ukraine unless they delivered damaging evidence against Joe Biden. Charmella would call Alexander Vindman to aid him in getting whistleblower protection status. Charmella went to Adam Schiff, claiming he had evidence of an impeachable offense and Adam Schiff would run with it. The Constitution says you can be impeached for bribery, treason, high crimes, and misdemeanors. What this fits into is bribery.
Did you discuss the July 25th phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky, or any matter associated with the phone call with any member of the press?
I did not.
Just to be clear, you did not discuss this with the New York Times, the Washington Post, Politico, CNN, or any other media outlet?
I did not.
In addition, they would leak details of this false narrative to the press. The mainstream media was leaked a partial transcript of the conversation. And in that transcript, the mainstream media would run a disinformation campaign saying President Trump authorized a quid pro quo.
On July 25th, 2019, the call occurred. I listened on the call in the Situation Room with White House colleagues. I was concerned by the call. What I heard was inappropriate, and I reported my concerns to Mr. Eisenberg. It is improper for the President of the United States to demand a foreign government investigate a U.S. citizen and a political opponent.
As the impeachment narrative began to crumble, they shifted strategies to falsely accuse me of being a back channel to Ukraine on behalf of the president.
Now to a CBS News exclusive. A White House insider who was named in Chairman Adam Schiff's impeachment report is refuting the suggestion he may have been part of a back channel to the president on Ukraine.
This false allegation came from Fiona Hill, a key figure in the Russiagate hoax.
You know, during her closed-door testimony, Fiona Hill said she believed President Trump and Patel had exchanged some material regarding Ukraine.
And we put this to him directly today, and he was very categoric. He said, I've never talked to the president about Ukraine. I've not shared documents with him about Ukraine, and I've not discussed investigations about Ukraine with the president, Tanya.
However, during Fiona Hill's sworn testimony, she confirmed unequivocally she had never met me and had no evidence of my involvement with Ukraine.
So I want to walk you through something you told us earlier. You said that you have evidence that as recently as this year, President Trump believed someone named Cash was the Ukraine director. Is that right?
It's not really evidence. And look, I want to be very clear about this. I was asked a question about this in my deposition. I did not raise it. And to be honest, I was surprised that I was asked the question.
But you heard that name Cash. Is that right?
I did, but again, it was in passing, and I explained the circumstances in which this came up. But I was asked a question in the course of my deposition about it.
That would ultimately lead to President Trump's impeachment based on that false story that he had negotiated a deal with the head of the Ukraine to a political benefit for himself here in the United States of America. Donald Trump turned the narrative on its head when he himself released the entire transcript of the call, which showed he had done nothing wrong.
Exploiting the Intelligence Committee as a venue for impeachment has been one of the grossest abuses in a process filled with cynical manipulations, large and small. But this farce will soon move to the Judiciary Committee, where impeachment rightfully belongs.
They always accuse their opponents of committing the very crime that they are guilty of. The deep state had the audacity to say Trump was participating in a pay-for-play scheme with the Ukrainian president and other government officials, when in reality, Joe Biden had bragged about withholding aid to Ukraine for political purposes. Eric Charmella was aware of Biden's unlawful conduct towards Ukraine, and yet said nothing and effectively helped in the Biden cover-up. In addition, Joe Biden and his son had been participating in actual pay-for-play schemes with the Ukraine.
Good morning. I'm here today to answer at a public hearing any legitimate questions Chairman Comer and the House Oversight Committee may have for me.
Hunter Biden is the son of now President Joe Biden, who has been convicted of multiple felonies in federal court for crimes involving narcotics and weapons, and is being investigated for potential fraud at home and abroad. During the 2020 presidential election, something strange happened. Hunter Biden's personal laptop ended up in a repair shop left behind by Hunter himself. The laptop contained a plethora of information regarding Hunter Biden's criminality regarding narcotics, sex crimes, possibly underage women, and other nefarious activities. The laptop was turned over to the federal authorities before the 2020 election. Under normal circumstances, this would be a bombshell, but this is not how the scandal would play out.
Look, Biden and his son are stone cold crooked, and you know it. His son walks out with millions of dollars. The kid knows nothing. You know it, and so do we.
The FBI, who had the laptop, would bury it. They worked to stifle any attempts to investigate the allegations, witnesses, or anything pertaining to the contents of the laptop. All of these things, which are probably illegal and definitely unethical, occurred during the investigation of Hunter Biden. The administrative two-tier system of justice refused to go out and indict Hunter Biden when their own FBI possessed the information themselves. That means there was an intentional decision made to give Hunter a pass. As the scandal unwinded, the intelligence community would send a disinformation campaign into play by having 51 members of the intelligence community across multiple agencies sign a letter saying that this laptop scandal had all the hallmarks of a Russian disinformation campaign. That's to say, former heads of the NSA, CIA, and Department of Defense all got together weeks before the 2020 election to call Hunter Biden's laptop Russian disinformation so people would think it wasn't real. The problem is the FBI knew the entire time and had corroborated that Hunter Biden's laptop was in fact real. Here's how good the deep state is. They said that the laptop in the investigation had all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. The mainstream media would do the rest. The mainstream media would come in and say it is Russian disinformation. In addition to the media covering up for Hunter Biden, big tech also intervened on Joe Biden's behalf. Twitter censored the New York Post, the fourth largest newspaper in America, by blocking its truthful reporting on Hunter Biden's laptop. Meanwhile, Facebook restricted the sharing of any information about the laptop on its platform. In my opinion, that single piece of election rigging propaganda secured Joe Biden's victory. Joe Biden has publicly claimed that neither Hunter Biden nor his family engaged with foreign actors, received money, or had any discussions with any entities about such matters. However, Hunter Biden's laptop contains detailed records of deals with the Chinese Communist Party that benefited the Chinese military, involving the transfer of American military nuclear technology during the Obama administration. The 51 Intel letter, which dismissed the laptop as Russian disinformation days before the election, has now been debunked. Intelligence officials who signed the letter, including former secretaries of defense, the CIA, and NSA, misled the public so they could achieve a political objective. Polls indicate that if Americans had known the media's claims were false, many would have voted for Donald Trump. January 6th, after a presidential election, is the day in which every president is confirmed to be president. It is the finishing of the counting of votes from the Electoral College and what we call a certification that the election the previous November has been certified to that candidate. Normally, it was a pretty perfunctory process that no one had paid attention to. Now, it is one of the most famous or infamous dates in U.S. history.
And I saw thousands of people here, but you don't see hundreds of thousands of people behind you because they don't want to show that.
January 6th, President Trump held a speech outside of the White House near the South Lawn. And a lot of those Americans who came to that speech ultimately walked down to the Capitol. And unfortunately, a few of them got out of hand. January 6th would set into motion a hurricane of injustice and misinformation from the deep state to permanently destroy not only Donald Trump, but every single person who had ever supported him. There are definitely individuals who committed crimes on January 6th that need to be prosecuted and punished accordingly. But there are way more individuals who are being subjected to the deep state's two-tier system of justice and falsely being labeled domestic terrorists. The deep state had finally succeeded in removing Donald Trump from the White House and aimed to keep him from ever coming back. The plan would be to prevent him from running for office, and this is where the insurrection narrative would begin.
But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt. It's a very tough period of time. There's never been a time like this where such a thing happened, where they could take it away from all of us, from me, from you, from our country. This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
In addition to building the case that Donald Trump had incited an insurrection on January 6th, the FBI would put an operation into play that will push the limits of even their corrupt lack of standards. We actually now know, thanks to brave whistleblowers at the FBI, that FBI field offices across the country had their unrelated cases seized by the Washington Headquarters Division and reclassified as January 6 domestic terrorism cases. This allowed Chris Wray to falsely testify before Congress that domestic terrorism was on the rise, providing the mainstream media and the deep state operatives with the narrative they needed to portray Donald Trump as the greatest threat to democracy.
I was appalled, like you, at the violence and destruction that we saw that day. I was appalled that you, our country's elected leaders, were victimized right here in these very halls. That attack, that siege, was criminal behavior, plain and simple, and it's behavior that we, the FBI, view as domestic terrorism.
The FBI would use this domestic terrorism narrative to round up Trump supporters present at the Capitol on that day. Even more disturbing, they started targeting Trump supporters who weren't present, labeling them domestic terrorists based on their vote. Eventually, the truth emerged. Donald Trump did not incite a riot or attempt a government takeover. Despite this, government officials continued to punish his supporters regardless of political affiliation. The FBI's ability to target and arrest citizens based on their beliefs should alarm every person in this country.
Former President Donald Trump tonight declared not guilty of the impeachment charge he incited insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th.
And he is hereby acquitted of the charge in said article.
Now that the insurrection narrative has completely been destroyed, what they are doing is shutting Americans out of social media platforms, of shutting off their bank accounts, of stopping their ability to be hired by private companies because they were, quote unquote, a Jan 6 insurrectionist. Specifically for January 6th, I was Chief of Staff at the Department of Defense for the Trump administration. Days before January 6th, I was in the Oval Office with the Secretary of Defense, the Chief of Staff to the President of the United States, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and one or two other people. At the end of that meeting, President Trump preemptively authorized 10,000+ National Guards men and women. Who cares? Why is that important? Because the Constitution and the U.S. Supreme Court have said you cannot, as a president, deploy uniformly the military domestically. That would be an insurrection. It would be the hijacking of military personnel for political purposes. That's what happens in third world countries, in banana republics. And that's why that safeguard is there. So once we got the lawful authorization from the president, we dispatched senior DOD officials to Mayor Bowser's office and the Capitol Police and Nancy Pelosi. Why? They are in charge of Washington, D.C. Once sent over there, Bowser and Pelosi rejected Trump's authorization of 10,000+ National Guardsmen and women. Not just verbally, in writing. And we got the receipts. The deep state disinformation campaign of insurrection has completely been destroyed by the testimony of a career Secret Service officer. Testimony that was given to the January 6th committee 2+ years ago that completely corroborates that Donald Trump did in fact authorize days before January 6th 10,000+ National Guardsmen and women, and that Bowser and Pelosi and the Capitol Police did in fact reject it.
The committee recognizes that our work has only begun. It's only the initial step in addressing President Trump's effort to remain in office illegally.
Now that he is running for office again, they claim President Trump committed insurrection and is therefore constitutionally barred from running. But what insurrection are they referring to? Did Trump unilaterally take command of the Department of Defense and armed forces to stay in power? No. He did everything to prevent the chaos of January 6th. The mainstream media falsely portrayed him as the sole cause of the violence. This insurrection narrative was the deep state's last attempt to eliminate Trump. To date, no one has been charged with insurrection. But the crux of that insurrection narrative, just like the crux of Russiagate and Hunter Biden's laptop and Joe Biden's classified information, is based on a pillar of lies and information that the government gangsters have withheld from you.
The rule of law does distinguish our country, but you have not upheld that. You have allowed the rule of law to erode, and that's why 65% of the people in this country have no faith in the Department of Justice under your leadership. They don't trust it. They don't trust you. The reason is because they're witnessing every day a politicized Justice Department and a two-tiered system of justice. For example, they see the DOJ, of course, aggressively prosecuting President Biden's chief political rival, Mr. Trump, while at the same time, they see slow walking and special treatment given to the president's son. That's just a fact that everybody can see with their own two eyes.
Merrick Garland is a career Justice Department employee. He would serve in many senior administrative roles at the DOJ for many different administrations. He would ultimately then be appointed to the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals and become a Federal Circuit Court judge. And then he would later and ultimately return in the Biden administration as the Attorney General of the Department of Justice. Merrick Garland has maintained the two-tier justice system established by his predecessor, James Comey, with the help of his FBI acolyte, Chris Wray, to prosecute Donald Trump and his supporters.
Currently, though, we are faced with elements that weren't
there 25 years ago in Oklahoma City. A proliferation of weapons. Secondly, social media and the internet, which serves as a gathering place for many of these domestic terrorists. What are your thoughts about how we should deal with those elements from the law enforcement viewpoint?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I certainly agree that we are facing a more dangerous period than we faced in Oklahoma City than at that time.
The only case you need to examine under Merrick Garland is how he handled the classified documents case of President Biden versus President Trump.
On December 20th, President Biden's personal counsel informed Mr. Lausch that additional documents bearing classification markings were identified in the garage of the president's private residence in Wilmington, Delaware. President Biden's counsel informed Mr. Lausch that those documents were among other records from the period of the president's service as vice president. The FBI went to the location and secured those documents. On January 5th, 2023, Mr. Lausch briefed me on the results of his initial investigation and advised me that further investigation by a special counsel was warranted. Based on Mr. Lausch's initial investigation, I concluded that, under the special counsel regulations, it was in the public interest to appoint a special counsel. In the days since, while Mr. Lausch continued the investigation, the department identified Mr. Hur for appointment as special counsel. This morning, President Biden's personal counsel called Mr. Lausch and stated that an additional document bearing classification markings was identified at the president's personal residence in Wilmington, Delaware.
Joe Biden has been caught handling, possessing, maintaining, and moving over 100 classified documents in 7 separate locations over a 30-year history. He was never permitted under the law, like presidents are, to possess any of those documents. And what did the special counsel that Merrick Garland appointed to oversee that investigation do? The same thing Comey did to Hillary Clinton. Even though Joe Biden is guilty of possessing classified documents, they, of course, under Merrick Garland's leadership, let him off the hook. Because who appointed Merrick Garland to AG? Joe Biden. And then who did they use to ultimately weaponize the system of justice like never seen before? Merrick Garland to go after Donald Trump and falsely prosecute him for possessing classified documents, which he, as a former president, has the absolute right to do so. The president is the ultimate arbiter of classification. That means he is at the top of the pyramid. He can classify information and documents when and if he says so. Every president has that constitutional right. And the president, President Trump, on his way out of office, declassified a slew of documents related to the Russiagate investigation that still have not been released today. And on top of that, every president possesses the Presidential Records Act authority, which is to keep documents from their presidency. Just like President Bill Clinton kept a recording of classified information in literally his sock drawer, and the United States District Court and the federal government upheld his authority to do so under the Presidential Records Act, we now have President Trump being charged for a crime for doing the very same thing. To make matters worse, the method which they used to obtain these documents was a raid on a former president's residence, Mar-a-Lago. The FBI's raid on Mar-a-Lago is not only unprecedented in that it had never been done before against a former president, but also unconstitutional in the fact that they didn't have probable cause to execute that search warrant, but did so and manufactured probable cause to achieve a political end. What they wanted to do was prevent Donald Trump from running for the presidency ever again. The FBI agents literally placed material in and around his office and then leaked that photograph to the press so that they could say Donald Trump possessed classified documents unlawfully. So why does any of this matter? If the DOJ is willing to go after the 2 most powerful men in modern U.S. history with the tools of the DOJ, but apply them differently based on their political backgrounds, what do you think they're doing to the respective movements that these individuals lead? The DOJ has a firm policy never to prosecute a presidential candidate during a presidential election year, except if your name is Donald Trump. The New York Attorney General's office has made it their mission and campaign to convict Donald Trump, not just criminally, but civilly, so that they can keep him in a court of law during the election cycle and out of the campaign trail season. It doesn't matter if you are the president or an American citizen. If you represent any threat to the government gangsters, they're going to use every tool in their power to take you, the citizen, out. A way I've commonly referenced the deep state and its government gangsters is the metaphor from Greek mythology, Medusa. You cannot destroy the deep state simply by clipping one or two of the snakes off of Medusa's head. You have to cut the entire head off the body. Had Donald Trump not won in 2016, he would not have exposed the flank of the deep state and their weapon of choice, the two-tier system of justice. Just think about all of the corrupt criminal activities authored by government gangsters that we would not know about. From Russiagate to Hunter Biden's laptop, to Joe Biden's classified documents case, to January 6th, to the 51 Intel letter and everything in between. We would never have learned that. How did they hide that information from you and why? The lies are the bedrock foundation of the deep state. If you do nothing, then the deep state and the government gangsters will win the day. If you do nothing and do not participate, then your system of justice will be corrupted. If you do nothing, then there will never be accountability for the government gangsters and their deep state operatives in the mainstream media that have robbed you of the truth. A historic level of exposure of government corruption demands a historic level response by the American public to fix Washington, D.C. In order to achieve this end, every one of you must participate in the destruction of the deep state and their government gangster operatives and put out the truth. So what do? You put the mission first. We need to create an army of people behind him that supports his movement with the truth. Do not take the radical left-wing bait and subscribe to the crazy conspiracy theories that they project upon us. They are the ones that utilize the FBI and DOJ to rob people of their constitutional rights to rig a presidential election. They are the ones who created the most atrocious weapon of injustice in U.S. history with their two-tier system of justice, to go after you. And you are responsible for helping us defeat the deep state. The faith that I have in the American public to go out there and put the mission first and save this country is the same one that I think millions and millions of Americans subscribe to. Now we just got to get you guys to mobilize with the truth and deliver it to the American people.
Say thank you, thank you, thank you, 'cause I'm so grateful, oh grateful, I'm so grateful. So I wanna say thank you for this day, Spirit, thank you for this day. Thank you for this day, Spirit, thank you for this day. This heat